858 Mom here, your YouTube mom in the 858. All my driving San Diegans will know what I mean when I say Spawars. That massive snake-like building that crawls along the I-5. You know the one with the weird tilted roof and security gates and shit. Ever wonder what's going on in there? I know I do. So I sat down and did some research. This one is a doozy, so make sure you're all comfy and settled in. Let's begin with the acronym. Spawars, Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command. This is a military operation, headquarters for research, development and deployment of the advanced rocketry and information technologies. It's also the home of something called the Marine Mammal Program, or MMP for short. This program is purportedly meant to train dolphins to safely detect sea mines because sea mines are built in such a way that they cannot be set off easily by wave action or marine animals growing on or bumping into them. But see, that's not the only purpose they are training dolphins for. In reality, these dolphins are being trained as a class of agents referred to as dream surfers. Dream surfers pierce the membrane that separates what we know of as the real world, crossing over into the worlds that we enter in whenever we dream in our sleep. Once they're dream surfers, engage in surveillance of our dreams. For all we know, they are also controlling our dreams and controlling our minds. But why are dolphins being trained for this and not humans? On October 24th, 2014, it was reported that more than 150 employees of Spawars had to be, quote, moved to temporary offices elsewhere to avoid toxic vapors. The report said that these vapors were of a chemical called TCE, or trichloroethylene, a toxic gas that's a, quote, a vestige of the building's history as a missile and aircraft production plant. But this story is a cover-up. It's not true. Those 150 employees were not relocated anywhere, and definitely not because of any so-called TCE vapors. In reality, all of these employees were dream surfers in training who died from ingesting a secret drug known as 4-FFA. This drug was developed by the government sometime in the 60s as a way to help transport bodies to the otherworldly space of our sleep, the dreamscape. But the drug had a nasty side effect. See, it turns out that passing in and out of the dreamscape is a lot like deep-sea diving. And as any deep-sea diver knows, you have to be careful when you're coming up out of the ocean. To move too quick. And you can get what is known as decompression sickness, or the bends, from air bubbles getting trapped in your bloodstream. In extreme and untreated cases which match the conditions of dream surfers rapidly emerging from the dreamscape, decompression sickness leads to death. So, what does this have to do with dolphins? Turns out, dolphins don't get the bends. See, they have collapsible lungs that allow them to breathe much faster than humans. After the 150 dream surfers in training died from their interdimensional decompression sickness, Spawars decided to merge the top secret dream surfing agency with the Marine Mammal Program with the goal of training dolphins to be dream surfers instead of humans. So, now how do you train a dolphin to be a dream surfer? And for that matter, how do you train a human to be a dream surfer? The key is in that drug I mentioned earlier known as 4-FFA. 4-FFA is a chemical that activates the wormhole receptors in the mammalian brain, allowing the possessor of its consciousness to access the various other dimensions that are stitched together in the vast metadimensional dreamscape. Scientists first developed an understanding of the wormhole receptor through the model of the McCulloch-Pitts neuron, which you may simply know as the neuron. The McCulloch-Pitts neuron was a conceptual model. You see that? Presented by the scientists Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts at one of the Macy conferences in New York, which were held from 1941 to 1960. Now, these Macy conferences are themselves of special note because it could be argued that it was in these conferences that a shadowy cabal of scientists and anthropologists built the conceptual infrastructure that now runs our modern world. These conferences were organized around something called cybernetics, defined by Norbert Weiner as a science of control in human, animal, and machine systems. Now, I want you to sit with that for a minute. The science of control in human, animal, and machine systems. Control is the key word here. These conferences were a large-scale undertaking to develop the control mechanisms of all systems, whether living or non-living, so that they may best be managed by the United States government. But before the very first Macy Conference ever took place, there was a gathering called the Cerebral Inhibition Meeting, which included Warren McCulloch, as well as the anthropologists Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead. Two topics were discussed during the Cerebral Inhibition Meeting: hypnotism and cerebral reflex. Later Macy conferences discussed topics such as computer learning, self-regulating systems, heat-seeking missiles, communication among ant soldiers, control mechanisms in society, memory, and, quote, the relation of cybernetics at the micro level to biochemical and cellular processes. These meetings were, from the very start, all about exerting outside control on first the mind, and then on complex machines and society itself, all the way down to the microscopic dynamics of our very bodies. To return to the McCulloch-Pitts neuron, this was a model of the brain that imagined neurons as binary on-off switches that combined into so-called neural nets, which behaved in almost the exact same way that a computer did. The way that Warren McCulloch put it is that brains do not secrete thought as the liver secretes bile. They compute thought the way computers calculate numbers. But the problem with this model is that it was completely bogus. I mean, totally bunk. This is not at all how brains work, and all of the scientists at the Macy conferences knew it. A brain only behaves like a computer if you want it to. And surprise, surprise, the government would very much like for the human brain to behave like a computer, because all you have to do to exert total control over a computer is to program it. The problem, of course, is that the brains don't work that way. But damn, if they aren't trying to make it work like that, that's why everyone thinks that the brain is like a computer and that neurons are like these little bits and electrons that hold information on your laptop. For half a century, the government has been trying to spread this idea of the brain as computer far and wide to prepare us for our eventual submission to a force of total control and containment. But there's been a hitch in the plan. There's something in the mammalian brain that makes it resistant to control. A sort of a remainder and an outside that cannot be captured by simple methods of hypnotism or propaganda. This is, as you might have guessed, the dreamscape. Who discovered the dreamscape and how did it happen? Well, it all started with who else but McCulloch and Pitts. In 1940, they published a paper about the way frogs' eyes work with their brains. This paper was titled, "What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain." It begins by pondering the fact that frogs seem to only be able to perceive objects that are moving. The authors write, quote, that the frog will starve to death surrounded by food if it is not moving. But he will, quote, leap to capture any object the size of an insect or worm, providing it moves like one. After further experiments and analysis of the frog's visual and cognitive system, the authors argue that, quote, the frogs I, quote, speaks to the brain in a language already highly organized and interpreted instead of transmitting some more or less accurate copy of the distribution of light on the receptors. And to cut down on the mumbo jumbo, this means that the frog does not really see what is actually out there, but rather that it sees a picture of the world invented by its brain to fit some deep-seated survival needs implanted there by evolution. Because of this cybernetics experiment, scientists came to believe that all brains were like computers, which, given the right technology, could be manipulated and reprogrammed to perceive things in an entirely different way. The problem is that mammal brains are not like frog brains. It turns out that Descartes was right. There is something that separates us from them, and that is the wormhole receptor. From dolphin experiments conducted in the 1960s, the scientist John C. Lilly discovered that all mammals, and this goes as much for humans and dolphins as it does for dogs, cats, cows, and rats, have receptors in their brains that connect them to the multidimensional dreamscape along with the brains of every other mammal in the multiverse. Unlike the dumb and pliable brains of frogs, our brains can resist control since they are attuned to the dreamscape and thus are not bounded within their own closed systems. So, put another way, our brains are not small and singular the way a frog's brain is. Our brains rather are large and possibly infinite. You could imagine that all mammals' brains are like part of one big brain, a one large brain of many brains hooked up to each other as well as to an infinite horizon of universes via the dreamscape. Any attempts at cybernetic control over a mammalian brain fails because sleep takes us to the dreamscape, letting control just wash away from us, so to speak. This frustrated the US government, but most of all, it frustrated Spawars, a center of the global cybernetic elite. Once wormhole receptors were, and the dreamscape were discovered, all systems were a go in figuring out how to establish control over this new system. Since computers were all that the cybernetic elite knew, they figured that the task was to make computers more like the dreamscape. In 1969, the Department of Defense first established the DARPANET, the earliest version of what would eventually become the Internet. So what most people don't know about the DARPANET is that it was secretly intended as a way to computationally model the structure of the mammalian dreamscape. Because, once you can model something on a computer, then it's not a big leap to actually manipulate that thing the way you would a computer program. So this means that every single time you've logged into the internet, whether it was yesterday or 20 years ago, you were feeding data into the global simulation of the mammalian dreamscape. Yeah. And so you may be wondering, why have you never heard about this before now? But the simple answer is that it was a cover-up. I mean, I want you to think back to that scientist I mentioned earlier, John C. Lilly. He's the guy responsible for discovering the dreamscape and the wormhole receptors, but nobody knows that. This is not an accident. It is possible that you have heard of Mr. Lilly before, and that is because he's infamous for conducting a set of experiments wherein he administered doses of LSD to captive dolphins in a supposed effort to crack the code of cetacean consciousness. The thing about this story is that it is not true, but at least not in the way you might think. It is true, after all, that John C. Lilly gave LSD to dolphins and that he would also try it himself. But what is always left out of this story is that these experiments led him to first make contact with the dreamscape, albeit in limited form. But turns out that LSD activates the brain's wormhole receptors in such a way as to mix some of the dreamscape's visual and emotional flows into the experience of waking life. So this effect is not exactly the same as actually accessing the dreamscape, however. It's as if LSD opened up some pressure hatch that allowed elements of the dreamscape to rush in. I mean, this is what happens whenever anybody takes LSD, and It's what happened when John Lilly tried it first on himself and then on captive dolphins in his laboratory. The discovery of a dreamscape accessible across mammalian species was a big threat to the cybernetic elite's project of global control, spurring a big misinformation campaign meant to hide the truth of John Lilly's experiments. Most people today, they know John Lilly as a New Age crackpot. Ask any scientist what they think of his experiments, and they will laugh in your face, either because they've been fooled by misinformation or because they are actively complicit in upholding this fake story of John Lilly as mad scientist. It's really fucked up when you think about it. I mean, here you have a discovery that could revolutionize our relationship with our fellow mammals and with the multiverse itself. But as soon as the cybernetic elite got wind of it, they slandered the man responsible and fed his discoveries back into the machine of global control. This experiment was the seed that led to the development of the DARPANET and of 4FFA, and changing the world in ways both visible and invisible. But there's no way you could know this unless you were in the know. And this is because the cybernetic elite doesn't want you to know. They want you to stay ignorant of the situation. And boy, are they doing a good job. You see, they don't want you to know that every time you go to sleep at night, you are, in fact, slipping into the scene of a cosmic war. This is a one-sided war between the shadow government, led by Spawars on the one hand, and the diffuse totality of the multidimensional mammalian brotherhood on the other. Where are you going to learn about this war? You're not going to hear about it on CNN. You're not going to read about it in the New York Times, and you're sure as shit not going to learn about it in school. The only place you'll hear the truth is from 858 Mom, your YouTube mom in the 858. That's why I'm here, after all, to spread the truth far and wide to anyone who will listen. But so, I'd like to get personal for a moment. Lately, I've been getting worried. See, you know how I love to talk to you guys about my trips to the spa. They're great. I mean, they do me up all nice. I get my facials, my mineral soaks, massage, everything. But, so, I've been getting weird dreams lately. And when I say weird, I mean really weird. And I've only got them on nights after I've gone to the spa. I'm talking about dreams about dolphins in spacesuits and flapping around in a vortex. Sometimes I'm walking down a long, empty corridor lined by surveillance cameras. The ground beneath my feet transforms into a deep mud, and I'll slowly sink down, 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 and worms will swarm up around me, and I forget. And sometimes I'm walking down these halls, and I'll encounter a man who looks like Kip Tyndall. And I feel creeped out and bad, and I wake up with a dry mouth and a fucked up headache, and I don't know, you guys. You see, the place I get my facials is right next to Spawars, and I'm starting to feel like I'm part of some secret experiments put together by the Dream Surfing Commission that are meant to take back control of the dreamscape from rogue dolphin agents. Yeah, you remember that whole thing I said about the bends? To recap quickly, a shadowy cabal of elite cyberneticists headquartered within the halls of Spawars in downtown San Diego has spent decades doing research and development in efforts to establish surveillance and control on a multidimensional mammalian dreamscape discovered back in the 60s by dolphin scientist John C. Lilly. All attempts to train humans to access the dreamscape via the ingestion of the dream-surfing drug 4FFA have so far failed because the process of returning back to the waking world ends up producing in humans the effect of an embolism, killing them instantly. But because of this failure, Spawars has turned to the only mammal of comparable intelligence that does not get the bends, and that is, of course, the dolphin. But the problem with dolphins, however, is that even though they are mammals, they actually have no real reason to pledge allegiance to the human species. I mean, yes, we like to think they're our friends, they're so cute, but what do we have in common besides live birth and a large brain in a very real world, a very real sense that we both live in completely different worlds. They live in the water and we live on land. Because of this, evolution has given us completely different bodies. We have arms and legs to walk and stay balanced, and they have flippers and fins to swim. We have thick hair on our heads and elsewhere on our bodies, and they are perfectly smooth. The better to swim between dimensions. Today, dolphins are the only creatures from our world who can traverse the dreamscape at will. Luckily, government dolphins have been trained in a special code that allows them to communicate with humans. So when they come back from the dreamscape, the dolphins give us reports of what's happened. But Spawars has no way of confirming whether or not these reports are true, and there's good reason to suspect that they're lying. You see, as different as dolphins and humans are, they share one vital characteristic, as I've already said: a large brain with extreme intelligence, and with extreme intelligence comes extreme deceitfulness. So dolphins, like humans, are wily and untrustworthy creatures. In order to establish some control on the situation, Spawars attempted to administer the lie detector tests on their dolphin agents, but there was one small problem. Dolphin bodies are too smooth for lie detector tests. I mean, have you ever touched a dolphin? They're so slick. It's like they're covered in oil or rocket lube all the time. Kind of how my skin gets after I go to the spa. I'm telling you, they're doing something to my body, and I'm not sure what. It seems like they're trying to make me smooth like a dolphin, but I can't tell why. And is it so they can develop new lie detector tests? Or is it so they can develop a human capable of safely passing between dimensions? What's the end goal here? I mean, where do I fit into all of this? All I know is they are trying to change the calculus of the situation. They're trying to rein in the infinite power of the multidimensional mammalian dreamscape. Spawars and the cybernetic elite are trying to contain the dreamscape, and thus to contain all life within and without it into a vast totalitarian database known as the Global Harmonized System. Global Harmonized System. You guys see that? The light's back. Okay. Soon, there won't be a difference between human, dolphin, or machine, much less one between a dreaming life and waking life. Soon, everything will be part of the Global Harmonized System. Containment, control, and reorganization. That's the name of the game. There's a secret war going on, and all of us are just points on a tactical map. I'm not sure what's going to happen to me in the meantime. I'm thinking I should stop going to the spa before it's too late. Anyways, thanks for listening, you guys. I know it got a little weird, but, you know, I've just been doing some research, you know, just trying to figure out what's going on in this big, scary world of ours. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But you gotta ask the big questions. Anyway, I'll make sure to keep you guys updated on my trips to the spa, my dreams, the news, etc. If you liked this video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and tell all your friends to follow 858 Mom, your YouTube mom in the 858. Until next time.